Greg Brownderville hails from Pumpkin Bend, Arkansas, and is the author of 3 books of poetry, A Horse with Holes in It, Gust, and Deep Down in the Delta. He is also the subject of perhaps the most delightful article I have ever discovered, one published by the Arlington Shorthorn, because it is titled with such blatancy that it almost reaches the realm of poetry itself, that title being, Poet Urges Audience to Cherish Words. For many of us who hail from the West, his work may be surprisingly foreign, but we should not take it merely as a study in dialect, but rather as a study of witness, as the poetry of lore. In Brownderville's work sung with good gospel lungs, we find Jesus in overalls, marsh and swamp, which are apparently 2 different things, the tornado as a form of transportation. Brownderville be our Wonderville, our translator of the holy tizzies. We are so excited to sit a spell with him. Please join me in welcoming Greg Brownderville.
Thank you, Lindsay. That was one of the loveliest introductions I've ever received. I'm so happy to be with y'all today. Such a beautiful place. I've never been to Provo before. One of my best friends in grad school was a native of Provo, and he was writing a dissertation on the Delta, where I'm from, and so we used to take a lot of trips into the Delta, and he would tell me about Provo. So it's nice to actually put the real place with the stories from Nick Garrell, my friend. They've been swirling in my imagination ever since. I checked into the hotel yesterday, and as I was standing there, the lady who was checking me in was asking for a confirmation number, so I looked at my phone. I was looking at the email to find the confirmation number, and I saw an email from one of my undergraduate poetry mentors, a guy named Johnny Wink. And I saw this email saying that his wife, Susan, had passed away. And Susan was also an English teacher at Ouachita Baptist University, where I went to school. And I took so many classes with Susan. And I was just thinking about her this morning and thinking about how consequential is the good teaching that you get in a wonderful undergraduate English course. And for years after taking classes with Susan, because she was such an exquisite sayer of poems, I would hear the lines I was composing in her voice to see if they worked, because I knew that if I could hear Susan saying them, something was going right. Because if there was something badly awry with the line, you simply couldn't imagine Susan saying it. And she meant so much to me, and I've just been thinking about her a lot this morning and thinking about Johnny and sending heart volts his way. And so I'm going to dedicate this reading to Susan Wink. The other day I was out in the Delta because I'm doing my new project is partly a matter of filmmaking and also podcasting and poetry and music. And we were shooting a scene in this little community in the Delta called Dark Corner. And I remembered that I had a poem called Dark Corner that's set in that little community. I thought I would start out with that one today. Me and Sparrow Rants were friends ever since they clipped our unbiblical cords. Side by side as babies, we rode our mama's cotton sacks and later worked from caint to caint together in the fields. Soon as Aubrey, Sparrow's brother, got old enough to shadow us, he made it 3, and Dark Corner, Arkansas had never seen such devilment. Our 15th summer, men and boys both, me and Sparrow lit a fire below a rotten tupelo and smoked out the bees. We sawed the tree down, stole the hive, and trucked it home along a path as wavy as a panther tail. We cut the comb in little waffly squares to go in every jar. That was the awfulest amount of honey, filled up 2 number 3 wash tubs like we took a bath in. After we got it all canned, a few jars had some live bees in them. We were sucking honey off the comb, and Sparrow asked if I believed in ghosts. I told him I would have to think about it. He said one night when he was 6, a shadow man with an ankly cypress branch for a cane shambled in the house and lifted Aubrey off his corn shucks. Me and Sparrow went frog gigging one night. I held the light. Where the swamp was loggy and we couldn't pass, you'd have thought bluegrass done gone metal way he worked that banjo of a chainsaw. Gar passed the boat like black submarines. We floated, listening to locusts, tree frogs, panthers. Thought we saw a bull shark up from the Gulf. As the moon slipped under cloud cover like a scared face, drumfish took to drumming. Listen, Sparrow whispered. Listen to that drum. It's like a stuttering heart. I was paddling not to get somewhere, but just for pleasure, working that lazy water. And Sparrow said, I swear it was a wet tornado. Said it a little too loud like I was arguing. If I'd have jumped in, we both might have died. I should have tried. I told him he was talking crazy. He said, God won't save me. He's doing me just like I done Aubrey. Said sleep was a strong woman but couldn't take him anymore. Every night he stuck to his covers, doused with sweat, seeing Aubrey spit and flail and bob loud-eyed like a holy roller getting baptized. One night, he said, I threw my sheet off and the demons come a-swishing in chilly through my pores. Next day I seen Jesus in overalls nibbling a ground cherry. He moseyed off into the tall cotton. This Monday at the market, I spied a jar of raw local honey. The comb was like a box of shells. I thought of Sparrow Rance, them eyes of his like a kitten's not all the way open yet. Late that man-child summer, he fired a goose gun at the stuttering drum in his chest and left me a chainsaw banjo and the need to truck with ghosts. And while I'm on this ghost kick, I'll read another ghost poem. It's called Tableland at Zero. At church this morning, Sister Fada sung a special called Higher Ground. Lord, lift me up and let me stand by faith on heaven's tableland. Every time I hear that song, I see a quail and manna picnic, a potluck in the wilderness. Sister Fada raised her hand and closed her eyes, whining high and country with a voice of pure banana cream Jesus. No one had your pew. A new boy seemed at home in mine. Night's on its way from Georgia, spreading white icing on the world. Soon I'll disappear into the woods again. Till then I'll sit and talk and watch you whilst you sleep. I am 0 years old now, too, Mama. Few years back when I was only 6, you told me, never make snow cream out of the first snow of the year. The first one purifies the air. That night last summer, just before I drowned, me and Sister laid face up on a sand blow, my lips ajar with awe. Looking at me from the side, she said, the Big Dipper's a pouring stars in your mouth, brother. So I swallowed, and they purified me like a snow. Then I went dissolving in the river. Anymore, I don't desire to sup or sip other than to swig the stars. Last week, Cache River froze to a crystal highway, but the water fell out, swagging planks of ice cracking, collapsing, disappearing into the swamp. But still, around 1,000 tupelos and cypress, glass tabletops hold, serving nothing. Clear, clean, holiest nothing. Don't be afraid too, Mama. I know the cancer hurts right now, but tomorrow's your 0th birthday. A few years back, there were a bunch of tornadoes in the South, and one of them particularly bad in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, or maybe there were several in Tuscaloosa. And I was reading about this online, and I grew up in the midst of a bunch of tornadoes. It seemed like we were having them all the time. And I always wondered what it would be like to be caught up in one. And I would ask around, because you hear all these stories about people being taken up in tornadoes. Well, while I was reading up on these Tuscaloosa tornadoes, I came across this article about a woman named Sharon Warren from South Dakota who had actually been taken up in a tornado and then let down without being harmed. And I got to doing the math on it. This supposedly had happened in 1955, and I thought, well, she could still be alive, and probably is. And I'm already online, so I'll just see if I can find a number. So I just did like a Yahoo people search, and sure enough, her name came up. And so I just called her up and asked her a bunch of questions about it. And she told me a lot of things that hadn't made it into the article I read about her. And I kept asking her what it was like to be inside that tornado, and this poem came out of my experience of talking to her. It's called All of This Only 50 Miles from the Former Home of L. Frank Baum, creator of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, July 1st, 1955, Edmonds County, South Dakota. Bright blues and greens, the sun a faceless coin. 9-year-old Sharon Warren, her mother trailing in a car, was riding home a freshly purchased gray and white mare. Sudden clouds bombed hail. The mother stopped and put a puffy black coat on the girl and said, "Cut across the field to the house. I'll take the road around and meet you." Seconds later, there it was in a camouflage sky, a clay pot on an unmanned potter's wheel. The horse fled, muscling up a high hill. The mother made it home and ran toward her daughter, whose long yellow hair swirled unmeaningfully in the wind, a drop of food coloring in a glass of water. Still astraddle the horse, Sharon ascended from the earth. She rode 1,000 feet inside a whirl one witness called a bale of wire in air. Riderless, the mare alighted in a canter. The girl landed like an airplane, let down easy into wheat the wind italicized. Sharon tells this story with a poet's flair, but asked what it was like to ride inside the gust, she can muster not a solitary sentence of description. Forever, the best of all saying, whatever else it means there's something unsayable here. I grew up attending a Pentecostal church in Pumpkin Bend, Arkansas, and some of my poetry comes out of that experience. And I wrote this long poem called "Lord, Make Me a Sheep," and I'm just going to read the first section and the last section from that. So the last section is, it involves a number of references to things that come in portions of the poem I'm not going to read, but I don't think it's that important that you know all those little references. So this is the first section. Brother Langston's sermon over, we all stood, every head bowed, every eye closed. A flannel-shirted lumberjack of a deacon named Joe Paul James was bawling and squalling as usual. "Oh, Lord, Jesus, Lord, move in our midst, Lord." Brother Langston said, "I don't care if you're a sinner man or woman or a holy saint of God. Come on, people, press in. Get in under the spout where the glory's coming out. I want to see 100% in this altar." My older brother Eric knew the roving prayer warriors had him on their Holy Ghost hit list. Had he stayed put, they might have come to his seat and made a scene of wooing him back to the Lord. Or worse, one time when a 15-year-old boy ignored an altar call, an elder called him out by name, said he had committed the unpardonable sin, said he could pull his hair out in the altar from now till doomsday, but God would never have him, never save him. So Eric eased up front and knelt on a pew of knotty pine in the second row, hoping to go unnoticed, a foolish move that made him all the more conspicuous, a timid sinner boy running from the Lord. He bowed his head on folded forearms and could smell the strawberry watermelon hubba-bubba on his trapped breath. The voice of Sister Lou, our piano player, floated across the church. "Swing low, sweet chariot." Then a firm, vibrating hand gripped the back of Eric's head like a gear shift. It was Joe Paul James. He bawled in a creepy, weepy falsetto, "Make him a sheep, Lord, make him a sheep." On sheep, Joe Paul hit a spooky minor note like stormy winds that rattle windows, open and slam doors. Eric, not a Bible buff, had no clue what the goal of Joe Paul's prayer could be except to turn him into a sheep, literally. While Joe Paul was slobbering through the same prayer over and over, "Make him a sheep, Lord, make him a sheep," Eric lifted up his head and cried out, "Bah, bah!" The church fell gravely quiet. And Joe Paul withdrew his hands and backed away as if Eric were a hold-up artist or a wolf, anything but a sheep. Eric stood up and sauntered back to his pew, sat down beside me, and whispered, "There's some world-class kooks in this church, I'm here to tell you." A few folks flashed Eric V-browed frowns, but most people, our parents among them, tried to act as though nothing had happened. Soon, Brother Langston asked everyone to stand. After making a few announcements, he said, as always, "Let's love the Lord and be dismissed," as if the alternative were to love Satan and stick around. And this is the last section. Lord, make me a flying squirrel or a flying holy roller. No, if I'm going to fly, make me a painted bunting, Lord. Make me Sister Lou's grackle cackle and hair weirdly beautiful. Lord, make me a fat pocketbook Pearly in the St. Francis River or an alligator gar in the Cache, Lord, and name me Black Blade. Come on, I dare you, make me an Ozark hellbender. Make me the fragrance of a witch hazel blooming in gelid January or a sunset changing colors like a bruise half-healed while a man staggers out of the rain like a ghost through prison bars. Lord, there's a bunch of things I want to be. The other day I found a pad I scribbled in when I was 10 or 12. One page said, Greg Allen Brownderville is a boy who is, and then it listed words I loved. So, Lord, all these years later, I beseech you, make me a boy who is coal, Swiss, cream, spearmint, product, capital, bar, marl, quote, tap, bot, doll, roll, mat, solicitous, ma'am, pie, toy, mellifluous, immitigable, Lord. Make me the Choctaw hunters on the Alabama River eating maize granted by unknown woman, daughter of the Great Spirit. Turn me into a spearmint done by top-notch scientists. Or better yet, a rainbow roll at the sushi bar. Make me the nut meat patterning inside a scaly bark hickory nut resembling a white oak leaf, or cartoon holy roller hands, or cartoon moose antlers. Pick your image and feed me to rambunctious boys in the woods. Make me a shoulder pad popping out of a football player's jersey, flapping like a wounded wing when he's hit. Make me the sound of mama Windexing the tabletop like a dog whimpering. Make me a team of sundogs and a mojo in Crawdad's pocket. Lord, I want to play Papa Legba opening the gates. I want to see what it's like to be a pouch of possums, dear Lord, Lion of the tribe of Judah. Make me a swallow of Dr. Pepper in a sexy woman's mouth. Lord, I beg of you, make me a cell phone tower. A little girl dreams the Eiffel. I want to be a wolf, Lord, or a sentence uttered by a beautiful student from the Czech Republic. Greg, you never seen girl more messy like me. Make me a swirl of actual Chinese chewing gum, hard on a pew's underside in a church meeting illegally. Convert the gum that is me to a nipple in the lustful mind bed of a boy after a preacher describes Bathsheba's famous rooftop bath a little better than a boy can stand. Make me Sister Lou's voice becoming Bathsheba's in the imagination, the magic nation. I'll be David, sinning and singing tragically. Make me the silence the devil's wreaking havoc in, and the havoc, if you please, Lord. Make me a sheep. And since I mentioned David in that poem, I'll read a David poem. This is called A Message for the King, and it's based on 2 Samuel chapter 6, and I think I should read a little bit of that, because I always thought when I would hear this scripture that it was sort of proto-Pentecostal. I remember thinking that as a child when I read it. And David danced, so you know, David married Michal, who was the daughter of the previous king, King Saul. And David danced before the Lord with all his might, and David was girded with a linen ephod. So David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouting and with the sound of the trumpet. And as the ark of the Lord came into the city of David, Michal, Saul's daughter, looked through a window and saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, and she despised him in her heart. And they brought in the ark of the Lord and set it in his place in the midst of the tabernacle that David had pitched for it. And David offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. And as soon as David had made an end of offering burnt offerings and peace offerings, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord of hosts. And he dealt among all the people, even among the whole multitude of Israel, as well to the women as men, to every one a cake of bread and a good piece of flesh and a flagon of wine. So all the people departed, every one to his house. Then David returned to bless his household. And Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet David and said, "How glorious was the king of Israel today, who uncovered himself today in the eyes of the handmaids of his servants, as one of the vain fellows shamelessly uncovereth himself." And David said unto Michal, "It was before the Lord, which chose me before thy father, and before all his house, to appoint me ruler over the people of the Lord, over Israel. Therefore will I play before the Lord, and I will yet be more vile than thus, and will be base in mine own sight. And of the maidservants which thou hast spoken of them shall I be had in honor." So that is the scripture I had in mind when I wrote this poem and message for the king. You can't miss it. There's a plywood sign. It's white paint zebraed with weathering that says, "Brush Arbor Revival." Jalopies line the road and flap their rusty wings. A peculiar people wade the night, the boot smooching mud. Under the moon, the silver rice. King David, half naked on the levee, gets in a godly tizzy and speaks in tongues. It sounds like, "Come in a Honda, leaving a Volvo. Come in a Honda, leaving a Volvo. Econo Large $39.99. The queen, unmelting, hisses mistily from her tower, sees his praise arms flung up filthy white like a gas station toilet seat. David waves at her window and laughs. "Honda, Honda, Hyundai." He lays hands on the people. "God, turn these silver fillings into heaven highway gold. Oh God, bless this little infant a-growing in mama's belly. Come in a Honda, come a Honda, come a Honda, come in a Honda, come a 99 a Honda." Silver o'clock, and David dances Arkansas. Work your way into the scrum. Tell the king we cheer him, we love him for these nights. But before you kiss his face and go, urge him not to be too proud, not to be too proud. This poem is called "Walking in Memphis." Y'all know that old song, "Walking in Memphis"? It's just one of the strangest, weirdest things that pop culture has ever produced. Oh man, I need to write I'm gonna go back and get a PhD, write a dissertation on that. "Walking in Memphis." The poem's not really about the song, by the way. I just use the phrase "walking in Memphis" as often as possible. Woke up this morning in Memphis, no memories to my name, of my name, or how I got here. Wandered into a boutique bar and gallery. They had some metal bottle trees for sale. A bluesman named T. Model Ford jangled and moaned and talked of Mississippi. He said to his bandmates, to the crowd, to humankind, "T. Model Ford is fixing to remember y'all how it's done." I stepped out and stopped below a disfigured real tree and asked some air named Lord to lead me home. I didn't get an answer other than the air, the prayer itself. I was wearing a black and gold sweater I must have thrifted, ugly as homemade sin, but it gave me the power of bumble flight, so I clumsily climbed the air, got so high I started laughing and couldn't stop. The roadways down below looked like the torso and parted thighs of a crime scene chalk drawing. Silver skyline, river mirrored, made a key's teeth. I hovered and buzzed above the flowery clouds. Got bored, though, and eased back down to the ground. The street was color overload, busy boulevard, boulevard of lovelies. Still buzzing a little and swigging from my flask, I drew weird looks from shoppers, gallants, made for magazines, and sleek chic ladies, expensive bags the shape of padlocks on their arms. Got so drunk I felt like I was working a Rubik's Cube with my eyeballs. I bumbled into Steak and Shake for no apparent reason. heard a plump, overdressed man say to another plump, overdressed man, "It is simply a fact that a Memphis salesman named Robert E. Lee does $2 million of revenue a year in the black hair care industry, which, incidentally, is dominated by the damn Koreans. Google it." I ordered neither steak nor shake. I stumbled onto Beale Street. Some crazos held up signs. "God hates fags. Fags doom nations." A pack of waifish 20-somethings came with signs of their own. "Dogs love figs. Bats are birds." I thought about the falling barns a few miles out of town, their doors, unopened envelopes from the past, or rebel flags just waiting for their blues and stars and Hank Williams Jr. grins. There came a sudden madness of gray, shushing rain as though the world had gone to static. Beale Street was a silver river you could drown in. I started to hallucinate. Floods, levees, fields. Walked a wall of dirt between the river and the rice. Spied a face at my feet, an old sharecropper, neck deep in Beale. I knew him, but wasn't sure how. He grinned up at me. There were sandbags strewn about. He used his hand to rake dirt into a bag, then pushed it into the water and kicked it into the levee down below. "Plugging muskrat holes," he chirped, "to keep the water off my rice. God honors work." And the water rose to his mustache, and the water went over his head. He stood there, rooted, never took his eyes off mine, staring at me from below the wavery surface till he was good and dead. And still he stared. I wobbled to my knees. I felt as melty as I must have looked to the old man's dying eyes. But then the levee was only the sidewalk, the river only the street, the tourists still the tourists, and I was drawing looks. I feel I had a family once. The dead man was our friend. I can't remember. Tiny teeth and claws come scraping at the inside of my skull first thing in the morning and last thing at night, and nobody on this earth knows who I am. So the last poem that I'd like to read, well, before I do that, I just want to say a special thanks to all of y'all for coming today to listen to me say poems, and I'd like to also thank Michael Lavers and Spencer Hyde and also Lindsay Keller for being so gracious and getting me here and taking care of me during my stay in Provo, which I'm very thankful for. This last poem is called "Welcome to the Old Cathedral." My name is Madison. I'll be your server tonight. I don't know where I am. Where am I? I'm at a Tony restaurant off the square. Crazy rain, trying to bring the stained glass to life, but how silly of me. Of course you know where you are. I know about the restaurant and the rain, very urgent rain, but where am I? You are here. I want to be there. I'm more of a diner kind of a diner. When I was young, I frequented a diner on a movie set. The director had disappeared, and the actors had forgot it wasn't real. I've wondered if I wasn't one of them. The owner, Bill, had a weird dog that looked like Benjamin Franklin. Bill and the dog would come and greet me. Fish and chips and a cherry Sprite, I'd say. "Faith will be your waitress," Bill would tell me. "She'll swing over in a minute to take your order." "I'm Madison. I'll be taking care of you tonight." And there was a baby, a diminutive flaneur, wobble walking all about the set, making a voice noise like a straw in a milkshake lid. "I'm Madison. I'll be taking care of you tonight." Is it true what they say, Madison? That Michael McDonald and Garth Brooks are playing a secret concert just a few doors down, and Elvis will split the eastern sky at sunrise? For our soup du jour, we have our invisible butterfly soul. That's going to come with 7 Australian painted lady souls dissolved in a hot holy water tinged with a suspicion of jasmine. It's not that McDonald has gone country, you see. Rather, Garth is doing blue-eyed soul. They're treating the audience to some universal evergreens like Let's Stay Together and Burning Both Ends of the Night. For our special, shh. If you close your eyes, you can hear what a fool believes. Michael McDonald singing through his beard. For our special, we have our steamed heart of hummingbird. That's going to be served with a complex reduction of unrequited Gemütlichkeit and transubstantiated red wine. Mad, you aren't listening. Let's go seeing. Let's go being. Roads agush with rivery rain. Lady legs a scamper on the square. Frogs hopping like tiny sparks of apocalypse. Garth Brooks, it's all happening. Can I start you off with the 30th stanza of Keats's The Eve of St. Agnes, whispered by Lee Young Lee into a hearty flapjack scroll? You're right. Nothing's happening. Can I go home? You may go wherever you like. But do I want to go home? To the elevator's déjà vu, the mirror's dyslexia? You may go whenever you like. But where? Will I want to go home if the king comes back and no one notices, and the water won't turn to blood, and the dead are busy getting their pH tested by the county extension agent? You may go wherever you like. If I do go home, what then? Hummingbird heart. Tell me, Mad, if I go home, will I sit there and smile stupidly like a Charlie Chaplin doll years after the ventriloquist has shelved him? Locked out of the cathedral and decades from my diner, I'll be a non sequitur without the Pringles. You may go whenever, wherever you like. Where did the shamans go, the strange men with their drums and dreams? I'll be taking care of you tonight. I miss that gal who took care of me at the diner. I miss her bathtub drain stopper necklace, silver beads, white plastic pendant. One time, when Fields of Gold was playing, she looked up at the speakers and said, "Oh, Sting, where is thy death?" And I loved her low voice and worshipped the golden calf above each of her roller skates. I miss Old Bill and Benjamin Franklin. I miss the wobbling baby, but the set has vanished into desert. Just as noun verb, so too does other noun. I don't understand. Faith will be your waitress. Thank you. So I am happy to take questions or comments.
Poetry can be really subjective sometimes in terms of like quality. So how do you, when you're writing, like, I guess what is your standard for like what's a good poem and like how do you revise it?
So the question is, given how subjective poetry is, how does one determine what a good poem is as one is composing? And how does one go about revising in light of these factors? Well, that's a tough one. I guess if the poem seems to be pleasing the unconscious mind, and if it's been driven in its own wayward path by those mysterious unconscious forces that go into the making of a poem, then I trust that there's something there that at least stands a chance of speaking to other people. And I can craft it with the kind of conscious mind, the editorial eye, as long as I am in touch with that underlying thing. Because I think that in the netherworld of the human psyche, people are family. Like we know the same things, and we've felt a lot of the same things deep down. And if the poem is speaking to that, and my editorial mind is working in a way that honors that as the servant of that deeper thing, then I trust. How do you know that? I mean, you know whether the poem came out of some deep, mysterious place that is inarticulable to you without the poem. Like the poem is the only way that those parts of you could manifest themselves in speech. And I think writers know the difference there. If they were just like cortexing it into existence, that's a different thing. And you know the difference. Mm-hmm.
So poets usually get inspiration from current or poets of the past or poems from the past. Who inspired you, or what poems inspired you as you began your career in poetry?
So the question is, poets are inspired by other poets, past and present, older poets, contemporary poets. So who are some poets who've inspired me? Well, I think some of the poets who've meant a lot to me are Shakespeare, Keats and Yeats, Emily Dickinson, Wallace Stevens, Dylan Thomas, Frank Stanford, Joe McDougall, James Wright, Larry Levis. But I've also been influenced heavily by non-literary forms of verbal expression, like the speeches that my high school football coaches made, and the freestyle country sermons I grew up under the sound of, and folk tale storytelling sessions on the store porch or the front porch. Also just I'm obsessed. I'm absolutely obsessed with the human voice, and I just love listening to people talk. And so I'm often influenced by just the strange ways people say things off the cuff when they're talking. And so when I look back at my poetry, I see that it's influenced as much as or more, as much by non-literary sources as by literary sources, and maybe more so. Mm-hmm.
So you just listed off those people, poets. A lot of them are like who we generally think of when we think of poets.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So how do you?
I'm somewhat of a classicist in that way. Yeah.
Yeah. So you said you're like a classicist, but also like you make your poems funny. And I guess I don't know. Maybe this is just me, but when I picture poetry, I don't picture poetry coming out of the mouth of a
Yeah.
storyteller. So how do you like balance that, and how have you found your niche?
Yeah. So the question is, given that many of the poets I named as influences are kind of canonical voices who aren't particularly humorous in their work, how is it that humor is such a prominent element of my work?
Yeah. Also the fact that you just make Southern. I don't know. Part of me was just like I could just hear it.
Yeah. I think that's the extra literary sourcing that you're hearing there. I mean, I do pick up on a sense of humor in Wallace Stevens. I mean, just something funny, like in the anecdote of the jar when he says, like, talking about the jar on the hill, like, it did not give of bird or bush like nothing else in Tennessee. It's just, I don't know, it's just a ridiculous statement that I derive a lot of pleasure from. And there are some contemporary poets who are funny, have influenced me that I didn't mention, because I wouldn't list them as like major influences, but they have influenced me. But yeah, a lot of that humor is just coming from my ridiculous conversations with my dad, who has a zany sense of humor, and just the kinds of conversations you hear like in a duck club, and just like I say, like preachers and coaches, because I think country preachers and football coaches they seem to be cut from the same cloth in many ways. And I remember when I was in 7th grade, we were just horrible in football. We were called the Jaguars. That was our high school mascot. But when you're in 7th grade, they called you the Baby Jags. And we were like the babiest of babies. I mean, we were just terrible, just small and terrible. And I I remember that we were horrible that year, both in football and in basketball. And after one half of football, our first game of the year, we were down like 38-0. And I remember our coach he didn't even let us go to the locker room. He just sat us down in the end zone. And he said, "Not a one of you boys has put a hit on anybody this entire half of football. You know, we issued you these helmets, and you're not using them. I'm going to ask the school to replace them with bonnets. That would be too good for y'all. I'm just going to get some napkins and gingerly lay them on your heads." It's like really a weird thing to say. You know, the thing about the everything up to, it's kind of cliched up to the point where he said the napkins. And then that same coach that after basketball season, we were just as bad in basketball, maybe worse. And at the end of the year, he sat us down on the court and said, "Well, you're physically the weakest bunch of boys I've ever had the dishonor of coaching. Every one of you's weak. But some of you guys, Rand, Cruz, DeWitt, Morgan, you guys are magnum weak." And that's the only time in my life I ever heard anyone use magnum as an adverb. But I loved it. I still got that. I put it in a poem recently. It's like it came back, the adverbial magnum. But so, I mean, moments like that have really stuck with me. I think it influenced my voice. Somebody back here? Mm-hmm. You do or do not? Uh-huh. So she's saying she enjoys seeing religious content in poetry, but she wonders whether there's really a place for that in contemporary poetry. Do people embrace it? Do they resist it? Do I get any pushback on that? I think that there is a place for it. I mean, I think readers respond fairly well to it. I think, though, that what a lot of inveterate readers of contemporary poetry miss in my work is that it's actually quite reverential. At least I think it is. That's how I felt about it when I wrote it. And it's essentially expressing love both for the people who practice the religion and the scripture, the manifestations of God inside the stories and inside the scripture, all of that. And people are willing to laugh with you at, the kind of comical antics of, say, country Pentecostals, but sometimes I think they miss the deeper layer of that work, which is real love and reverence. So sometimes I feel that it's accepted but not quite gotten, like not quite heard. But some readers have really gotten that, and it's always gratifying when people do pick up on it. I think that readers in our age are quicker to confuse persona and poet than readers in some other literary eras. And so sometimes, I had a friend of mine in grad school said, "Greg, I'm in class with you, and I think that you're a smart person just on the basis of things you say in class, but, it just doesn't come through in your work because your characters are so stupid, and I just, I think it keeps people from seeing how smart you are." It's like, I mean, where do you even begin in showing how ridiculous that comment is? So that not understanding what the difference between a persona and the poet behind the poem is a problem, I think, sometimes when it comes to readers of contemporary poetry. But overall, I haven't gotten just a whole bunch of pushback on it. I've never had anybody say, like, "This is not the stuff of poetry. Why are you writing that?" I've never run into a comment like that. I think there was a hand of it, yeah.
So you were talking about voice and character, and it's so evident in your reading of the poems. I'm wondering if, when you write poems, you write them more to be read or
Well, having grown up in a place with a very strong oral tradition, do think of poetry as something to be heard first. I really do. I think of it as something in the air, and I think in its roots, it was that, and I think that the best poets are saying their lines aloud as they read. You can tell, you can read it, you can just see the sensitivity to the sounds of the words. But I want it to stand up on the page, so I try to do all sorts of things on the page to help readers who come to it as a printed thing hear it. And so I use, just in rare instances, I'll use phonetic spellings, not very often because I think those get annoying real fast. But I do use them on occasion. I will use meter and rhyme to kind of coach the reader. It's like when you read Lord Byron's Don Juan, you can tell that it's supposed to be Juan because of what the words he rhymes Juan with. It can't have been Don Juan if you're going to read this if you're reading the Ottava Rima of Byron, you can tell. And he also makes jokes, like he's joking about how the English are always ruthlessly anglicizing pronunciations, and so instead of like Guadalquivir, you can tell he's wanting you to say like Guadalquiver because the way he's rhyming, and the way the meter works and how the rhyme works. So I try to do all sorts of things to help readers hear it, because even if they come to it as a printed thing, I want it to wind up being a heard thing, if only as a function of subvocalization in the mind. Although I would prefer that readers read these things out loud, because I think that's kind of my idea of how poetry works best. So the question, I think I might not have repeated that question there. The question I was responding to there was just, do I think of poetry more as a thing to be heard or read? Because my poetry obviously makes extensive use of voices. Any other comments or questions? Uh-huh.
Which of your books were you reading from, and do you have like one of your books you recommend us starting with?
I read today some poems from Gust, which was published in 2011, I think, and some from A Horse with Holes in It, which was published in 2016. I think Gust is a good one to start with just because it shows the range of things that I do. Horse with Holes in It is a bit more it's a bit less various with respect to form and tone, and I intended it to be that way. And it's much slimmer volume too. You can tell Gust is like a New and Selected or something. I mean, it's a lot of book, but yeah. But it would make sense to read Gust and then read A Horse with Holes in It, I think. The question being there, like, what did I read? Which books did I read from today, and what would be a good introduction? Which book might you start with if you wanted to get acquainted with my work? I saw another hand up when I.
I mean, like, first of all, I just wanted to say that give me 5 IMs, good and hard. I'll drop that Philistine places from the script. That's great.
Thank you.
And I just, like, in the pre-reading, I noticed that you have, like, prose poem, free verse, meter, like, blank verse, and I was wondering, like, what do you enjoy most writing in, and what do you like most in? What's the balance there? Like, how do you make decisions about the form of the poetry?
Yeah, so the question is, given that I write in so many different forms, prose poems, lineated free verse, metrical rhyming verse, blank verse, etc., which form do I enjoy writing in the most, and how do I decide poem to poem which form to use? And the fellow who asked the question was quoting a poem called Folly from A Horse with Holes in It, which is about an English teacher who doesn't take joy in his students' kind of foibles. And he doesn't see any opportunities there, any creative opportunities. He just sees them as mistakes. And then there's another character in the poem who says, well, let's think about it. Some of these mistakes might be strokes of genius if you look, just look at it through a different lens. I would say that I think about how the poem feels in my imagination, because often when I'm writing a poem, the first thing that I have is sort of something like a non-representational piece of digital art or something. It's like a painting that you could walk into and eat. Strange. It's sort of a multi-sensory, non-verbal thing that is there, and I'll kind of think about it, maybe manipulate it a little bit to try to make it be as beautiful as it can be, or as appealing to me as it can be, and then I actually translate that strange thing into words. And so when I'm thinking about what the poem wants to be, I just ask myself, does this feel like a prose poem? Does it feel like a metrical rhyming poem? Does it feel like a lineated free verse poem? So some things I think about there are, if the poem is discursive and has a kind of argument to it, I'll often write a rhyming metrical poem, because I've been so heavily influenced by, Yeats and Keats and Larkin and various other poets who use rhyme and meter so effectively when they're making a case for something, or making some eccentric argument. I love that mode, both as a reader and as a writer. If I'm writing something that feels very contemporary texturally and imagistically, like if I'm writing out of contemporary, especially urban experience. I now live in Dallas, Texas. I grew up in a tiny community, so I have these different life experiences in very, very different places, but strikingly different places. If I'm writing free verse, if I'm writing these kind of like hip, urban situations, and I've got those voices out of contemporary American life, sometimes I feel that as lineated free verse. I don't know why. Maybe it's because of the influence of a poet named David Berman, who is the lead singer of the Silver Jews, that his book Actual Air influenced me, and the way he uses lineated free verse, I think, put that in my head. And then the prose poems, they tend to be a little more narrative, or sometimes they're little stories, like that tornado poem I read. That's a prose poem. It's got this little story to it. Yeah, I think those are some of the things I think about when I'm thinking about mode. I don't enjoy one more than the other, as far as I can tell. I really enjoy all of them. And I like keeping all the forms available. I don't really want to sell out to one way of writing. And I was trying to kind of make a point about that in a sense with Gus, because it's a very unusual first book of poetry. Usually people's first books are thin, slender volumes with one kind of poem, one or two kinds of poems maybe, like pretty monochromatic, and it's a singular voice, and it's a somewhat uniform voice throughout, and often one topic or subject. And I wanted my first book to be really busy and all over the place formally, lots of voices, just like a festival of voices, to kind of say, this is how I think of writing. I don't really think of it as doing one thing. Mm-hmm.
Okay, this is just to settle a debate I have with a friend.
Okay.
Yeah, you said you lived in Dallas, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
Do you consider Texas the South? And if not, are there parts that you consider the South and parts that you don't?
I certainly don't think of Texas as a whole as a southern state.
Okay.
Texas did secede from the Union, so historically it was part of the Confederacy. So in that sense, it's a southern state. But culturally, I don't really think so. East Texas, far East Texas, has strong southern elements to its culture, and the landscape is more like the South. So one could argue that East Texas is part of the South, and I think that would make sense. But Texas feels to me like Texas. It's not easy to place into a larger region. You could say it's sort of western or southwestern, a little bit midwestern and up towards the top, and a little bit southern towards the east, but it's kind of like the Ozarks. You just have to think of it as a thing unto itself. Are the Ozarks in the South? I don't know. They had no stake in the Civil War. They did not want to secede from the Union. They don't feel like Appalachia. They don't feel like the Deep South. They're not Midwestern, at least in Arkansas. They're not. So, I mean, it's just one of those regions. I think Texas is just a thing unto itself. That's the way I think about it. It has hints of southernness, westernness, southwesternness. All right. Thank y'all so much. This was fun. I appreciate you having me.